This class is called Nutritional Wealth versus Nutritional Poverty, Part 1. There are many heady ideas about health and healing regarding foods, cleansing diets, raw foods, juicing, low fat, low protein, narrow standard diets, supposedly for everyone. We have low carb eating, we have low protein, we have special ingredients such as acai berries, we have special herbs and superfoods that everybody should take. It's not to say that there's some benefits of adopting some of these approaches for short times or incorporating some of the foods that are recommended. The problems is that when these methods are continued for a long, long time, they cause problems for people. In the next slide, you'll see that many of these heady ideas are promoted by the health gurus. Health gurus know what everybody should be doing. Whatever their approach is what they should be doing. So we have the low-carb health gurus, and we have the low-fat health gurus, we have the vegan health gurus, we have other health gurus we have the macrobiotic health gurus who are promoting close to vegan diets, and everybody is saying that everybody should do whatever their particular method is. Of course, continuing, we have the cleansing gurus, the fasting gurus, and all the people who are saying that they know what you should be doing. The problem is that many of the methods, although they can be fine for short-term use, over the long term, they'll create a kind of nutritional poverty. And what we really need is nutritional wealth. Nutritional wealth to get the abundance of nutrients that our body needs. And this will change for everybody, but there are some basic guidelines that can help us to understand this. Now, this nutritional wealth is something that we'll be talking about how to create. Now, with nutritional wealth, it doesn't mean that people don't have problems from excess. People in America do have problems from excess. Around the world, many times people have problems from too little. And some of the diets around the world that are promoted are poverty diets. So commonly, the more vegetarian macrobiotic diet that's promoted is known as a poverty diet. And for people who have had excess, too much poor quality fat, too much poor quality protein, too much refined sugar, for a short period of time, that kind of diet, where you take away the excess fat, the excess protein, the excess sugar, can be beneficial. People have the restrictive type of macrobiotic eating has some nutrient-dense foods in it, so it's far superior than going on other restrictive diets, including raw foods diets, or diets that or many vegan diets that have lots of foods in them that may not necessarily be healthy for people because they overemphasize them. So the solution is not to create long-term nutritional poverty, although short-term may be fine for certain conditions. So, for instance, reducing fat for some person who's overweight for a period of time is very healthy. And keeping away from refined sugar and refined flour in high amounts is generally a good idea for everybody. But what we want to do to create the most abundant health is to basically figure out what is the way of eating that's most nutritionally abundant, that will support our long-term health. And as I mentioned in a previous class in the series, there are clues to telling us what is the most nutritionally abundant diet, and that's by looking at the longevity cultures around the world. As we mentioned in that lecture, there are many different variations on what people ate in longevity cultures, but there are some common factors. So, for instance, we saw that certain people would drink coffee and they had longevity, and some people would never touch coffee. Some people would drink a fair amount of alcohol. Some people will never have alcohol. Some people will have a lot of fish in their diet, while other people would have some naturally raised animals or wild animals in their diet. Some people would eat dairy, some people wouldn't. What is common about all the traditional eating around the world is they covered what we call the maxi-nutrients. They always had these in abundance. Various kinds of carbohydrates, various kinds of concentrated proteins from animal sources, and natural fats in varying degrees. So this included a variety of whole natural foods, which basically were various kinds of grains, tubers like sweet potatoes, as staples all around the world, fresh, wild, and cultivated vegetables and fruits, wild fish, wild game, or healthy, well-exercised domestic animals, and for some cultures, dairy products, herbs, spices, and various kinds of teas, natural sugars, natural sweeteners rounded out the diet, and these changed around the world. In learning about how to choose these foods, in a later class we'll talk about going beyond dietary dogma, we can understand the overall effect of food as well as understand the nutrients of food. If we understand the overall effect and the nutrients of food, it gives us a broader view of what we should be eating and what's the healthiest for us to eat, and how to choose foods that we need. There are some obvious ways of choosing foods. For instance, if someone is overweight, then they need to eat less rich foods like fats and refined sugars, which are good to minimize anyway in your diet, as well as, eating less foods, but they still should eat a very nutritionally rich diet. For healing, there are special adjustments that are used for food by understanding the overall condition of a person, which I diagnose through a full spectrum type of diagnosis that I do. Now, furthermore, clues to nutritionally abundant food exist in traditional cultures through the concept of sacred foods. The concept of sacred foods is that these foods were so valued that often ceremonies and special days were created to give thanks for these foods. And the sacred foods are interesting because they have one thing that's very much in common. The two sacred foods were all kinds of animal foods and grains. And what they have in common is raising or catching animals, hunting animals, as well as cultivating grains are not easy. So we know that there must be something about these foods, intuitively traditional people around the world knew, that made them so that they put so much effort into getting them. And it turns out, if we look at it from a nutritional view, animal foods are very concentrated in proteins that you can't get from only vegetable foods. Special kinds of fats are in all kinds of animal foods. Special minerals like zinc, some calcium, as well as incredible amount and array of vitamins, especially the B vitamins, but other vitamins like vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin E, very essential for health. Some of these are only available from the animal foods. Grains themselves are concentrated in carbohydrate, which the animal foods don't have. And we need, according to research, evidence, we need a good amount of carbohydrate to be active and to fuel our cells. So that cultures around the world, value these foods, and every culture around the world put emphasis into it. If they didn't have grains, then they would have things like tubers, like sweet potato or potato-like food, which would round out their diet. So this will give us, these are most nutrient-dense foods that we need to our health, as well as the other foods that traditional cultures had. When sacred foods are left out of the diet, such as in low-carb regimens, where they leave out all the carbs or they minimize carbs, then there's a lot of evidence and experience that health suffers. Lots of problems arise. When animal foods are left out too long without compensating by added nutrients from supplements, or things like protein powders to get the protein quality, the aspect of protein called amino acids, then again, people will suffer. And particularly from the lack of animal foods over the years, since I ate a diet myself that was very low in animal foods for many years, I can see firsthand problems that arose from that. And there's been a lot of evidence accumulating about people who have had problems from a lack of animal foods, just as there's a lot of evidence of people having problems from a lack of grains in their diet and carbohydrates. Now, in the next slide, you'll see cleansing, the cleansing regimens that are popular today. This is the lemon olive oil cleanse. So we have lemon olive oil cleanse. We have cleansing through various methods such as coffee enemas. We have fasting cleanses, juicing as a cleanse. Special foods and herbs are recommended as cleanses. Special diets, that vegan diets are often recommended as cleansing, and raw foods diets. The problem with this is that there is a half-truth to some of these. The half-truth is that we live in a toxic world, and we are exposed to lots of toxins that have been found to accumulate in our body. Toxins from the air, toxins from the water, toxins from the food that we past ate, and these toxins accumulate in various fat cells and fatty tissue in the body. Problems with the fasting methods is that they can be harmful if done too many times or repeated or too long, and they can be worthless at best, and many times methods that work initially won't work later on. So, for instance, people, when they fast, the body goes into a stress mode, and in the stress mode, the elimination system will basically speed up, and people will start to detoxify. If the fast lasts longer and fats are discharged, the toxins in the fats will be discharged. Problems arise with fasting is that if someone has been under stress from a poor quality modern diet and lifestyle, or a restrictive, nutritionally poor, healthy diet, the body won't go into the stress mode, so they won't have a speed up of elimination. In fact, what happens is the metabolism will drop and elimination will slow down. And it will be very hard for the body even to lose fats. And it puts a strain on the body. So repeated fasting has its problems. And the reason why when the metabolism drops, a person is prone to all other diseases, and the metabolism may stay dropped even after the fast, unless a person knows how to speed it up. Vegan diets that recommend no animal food are saying that animal food is toxic to the body, interfering with elimination, creating what they call a form of toxemia, which is toxins in the intestines. And the reason why this occurs may occur is because a person has low stomach acid and low metabolism, so they're not digesting well. So there's a truth to it, but the problem with this is that if a person has low stomach acid, not only animal food will rot in the colon, so will grains, so will beans, so will other foods that people eat. So they'll have problems from eating a whole variety of foods, not just animal foods. So the half-truth is that people can overeat animal food, just like they can overeat any food. At the same time, people valued animal food because of concentrated nutrients. Long-term, short-term use of a vegan diet can be helpful for people who have overeaten animal protein and fats. But over the long term, then deficiencies arise in B vitamins, all kinds of B vitamins, including B12 and B6, and proteins and amino acids, because although technically all vegetarian food has proteins, it's at a very low level. So people need some concentrated protein in addition, in varying amounts. And the amount varies from person to person. Vegans do better supplementing if the person wants to be totally vegan, and besides supplementing with nutrients like B vitamins, zinc, and some other nutrients, also some protein powders to get more concentrated amino acids and protein. Raw foods diets is like a super fast because our bodies don't have a rumen. A rumen is a stomach that has bacteria. And when animals that eat all raw eat their diets, the fiber from all the raw foods are locked in fiber, is broken down by the stomach bacteria, the rumen. So they absorb all the nutrients from the raw foods, the raw vegetables that they eat. Human beings can't do this, so a whole raw diet will be basically like a fasting diet, because we can't break down the fiber cooking breaks down the fiber, and that's why majority of traditional cultures ate almost all of their food, except for things like pickles and fermented dairy products and fruits in a cooked form. Juicing also has another problem, is that when you juice, you dilute your body fluids of sodium, which lowers your metabolism and puts your body in a stress mode. If a body is already in a stress mode, then it slows the metabolism, stopping elimination and interfering and weakening all body functions. A further problem with juicing is some of the things that are juiced. For instance, greens are popular for juicing, and greens contain goitrogens. And the goitrogens basically are substances that stop your thyroid from producing thyroid hormone. So when people, that's very popular now to have raw kale and kale juices and things like that, and eventually that would wreck a person's thyroid. Your thyroid will stop functioning if they basically take that. So this is not a good thing. And then people will, and there's also closely related to this is the acid-alkaline myth. Yes. So that basically there was an article on the web by a man named Chris Kessler recently. If you look up acid-alkaline myths, you come up with his name, written about the science of acid and alkaline. And the science of acid and alkaline is that foods don't alkalize your body. All food breaks down into acid. That's what happens. It breaks down into acidic substance, and food doesn't alkalize your body. The alkalizing your body takes place from your kidneys and your lungs. Those are the two things that get rid of acids. So then they get rid of the excess acids that come from the breakdown of all foods break down to acids. And then basically because what the theory is that they're actually burning the ash of the food, making ash of the food and testing it. And certain ashes are alkaline and certain are acidic. But that has little to do with what happens in your blood. You can't measure your acid alkaline by your urine. If you eat a green drink, your urine will turn alkaline, but it doesn't mean your blood's alkaline. It has no connection in the science to the blood. Same with the saliva. It has no connection to the acid-alkaline condition in your body, the saliva, testing your saliva acid to alkaline. So you can't do that. So basically, it's a myth. All the food, the science of it, and Chris Kessler goes into detail with there's two parts of this acid-alkaline myth, is that all food becomes acidic. So you can't alkalize your body through food.
So you have to build up your kidneys.
You can't acidic. Well, you have to have a healthy functioning body. That's what that means. Like healthy kidney function comes from healthy metabolism. Sure. Healthy lung function comes from healthy. And deep breathing can help, to get rid of acids. So basically, so this is the myth. So people will go on acid-alkaline diets, and even the acid-alkaline diets that are taught are incorrect too. Because they're taught also are incorrect, because what happens is basically protein is not acidic. Protein is a buffer. It's in all the charts, acid-alkaline charts, and Herman A. Hara had an original book on acid-alkaline. That's all incorrect. It's based on the ash. So basically, the protein is a buffer. So if you don't have enough protein, then basically your body will go out of balance. It can run acid or alkaline, because without enough protein, your kidneys don't function. So there's a big myth about that. Now, of course, you could eat certain extreme foods that might create an acid load in the body. But the thing is that all food breaks down to acid. It doesn't break down to alkaline. That's the science of it. So this acid-alkaline theory was created by some of the early natural hygienists. And so they had an agenda. The agenda of the natural hygienists was to get people not to eat animal food. So they had an agenda. And the natural hygienists are interesting, because if you if you go on the internet and you look up the natural hygienist against vegan eating,
you'll come up with a couple of pages there where these natural hygienists, which were the first kind of like natural eaters around the 20th century, these new natural hygienists don't recommend people be vegan, because they said the founders of the natural hygiene movement, who were mostly vegan, they were original vegans. The term vegan was coined in 1960, but before that they were the original vegans. They all died either young or they suffered with terrible disease the last 10 years of their life. So this group of hygienists is not recommending people be purely vegan, because they find it's not healthy for people to do that. And it's very good for them that, as people who probably have done this for many years, they're for the people rather than for the ideology. So they basically are, doing the right thing for people. So the natural hygienists created this. They also, closely related to this is food combining. So you've probably heard of food combining, like you're not supposed to eat protein with fat, or not eat carbohydrate with this, or carbohydrate with protein. And I tried it a little bit, so I tried it. It couldn't last more than a couple of days. Because what happens is you start eating this really weird diet. They recommend you only have carbohydrate once a day, concentrated carbohydrate once a day, and only have protein once a day so that you can combine it correctly. And then you end up being protein deficient and calorie deficient. Now, the idea of protein combining is that when you eat a certain food, if you eat like protein and carbohydrate together, like so for instance you ate salmon and rice together, then the rice will stop the protein from passing through and it'll rot. And the idea is that certain substances are produced in your stomach when you digest protein, and certain ones are produced when you digest carbohydrate. It sounds like, sounds scientific, but it turns out that's not true. What makes everything digest is basically stomach acid. If you have adequate stomach acid, it's not just for digesting protein, but you can't produce stomach acid without complete protein. Complete protein is either you eat huge amounts of grains and beans, or you eat animal foods, a certain amount of animal foods. You can't get it from other foods, from vegetable foods, the complete protein. So if the diet is low in protein, stomach acid goes down. When stomach acid goes down, what happens is your pancreas doesn't produce enzymes to break down carbohydrates or fats. So it's related to the stomach acid is like the key to that. And so to produce stomach acid, you eat enough concentrated complete protein, your body starts producing stomach acid. And then basically you'll digest everything, including the carbohydrates and fats and proteins. But food combining was again created by one of the natural hygienists to get people to eat less meat. Because according to the rules, you can only eat concentrated protein once a day, because otherwise it doesn't fit together, the rules. So again, you'll become calorie deficient, protein deficient, carbohydrate deficient, everything. That's again one of the diets that has been overly restrictive for people. Now, many diets, including the vegetarian-oriented macrobiotic diets, the vegan diets, demonize meat and animal food. And they blame it for all kinds of things. For instance, commonly we talked about the one that meat putrefies in your intestines. Well, basically everything putrefies in your intestines if you don't have stomach acid. But if your stomach acid is good, basically meat digests completely and before it gets to the intestines. It's the most easy to digest food. Beef, meat, and other meats is the easiest to digest food. Now, some people will say, well, if they try to eat it after years of not eating it, many years of not eating it, they'll say they have indigestion. Well, that happens with any food, it turns out. So, for instance, if you haven't eaten meat, for instance, I didn't eat meat for maybe 35 years. I didn't have any meat, any chicken. 10 years, maybe 30 years in, I started eating some eggs, but I didn't have any meat or animal food for 35 years, and maybe even more so. And then maybe about 5 years ago, I started including it, and at first I couldn't digest. I had to eat very small amounts until I got used to it. But it turns out when you do research, anything that you cut out, you can't digest. Like the modern macrobiotic diets that are more vegetarian-oriented really go low fat. So when I started to realize that fat was important, I would encourage people to eat fat, and then they'd get disturbances from eating fat. They'd feel, and I said, okay, you have to go slow. But erroneously, people think that, oh, I can't digest fat. Erroneously, if a person can't digest meat, at first they say, oh, meat's not good for me. That's the thinking. It's not good for me, rather than I can't digest it. Work on your digestion, some digestive aids to help you break it down. Same with fat. But it turns out, this is an interesting thing, when people go low carb a long time, they introduce carbs or low sugar, they introduce sugar or carbs, they can't handle them either. So sometimes people will have reactions to things, like if you are nutritionally deficient, add in a nutrient, you might have like skin breakouts, skin problems, things that can occur when you do that because your body is now doing something to heal. And it's not an imbalance. But the misunderstanding, this actually is one of the things that keeps people's diets really narrow. They think that their body is telling them something when it's basically they're used to something. And so myself, my view now is I want people to eat the widest diet they can, nutritionally, with a variety of nutrients to stay healthy. Get to the widest, more natural diet they can. When people said that, when people like, for instance, that person who I said was fasting and he looked like he was 90, in his pictures, and he was only 60, he said he had written, I had written him once, to ask him a question. He said that, I was doing some fasting, and after fasting, when I ate grains, I got sick. So I knew grains were not good for me. So, and I'm thinking, I was polite. I didn't tell him, but my thought was, oh, you weakened yourself. So you couldn't eat grains. Even natural sugars, people like say, I'm so sensitive to sugar, I can't eat it. Even the natural sugars, if someone says a sugar hurt their teeth, it's not related to the sugar as much as it's related to what's missing in their diet. The rest of their diet is missing. Because that will, for instance, like rice syrup has phytic acid in it. And phytic acid could take minerals out of the body. But if you soak grains, you neutralize the phytic acid. But here's a very interesting thing. Some of those longevity people that Weston Price studied, and other around the world, they didn't soak their grains. And they had great teeth. They didn't soak their whole grains, and they had great teeth. But they had really great metabolism. So when they had a great metabolism, it didn't matter. So that trumped it. So basically, but if someone gets disturbed by something like rice syrup, it usually means something else is missing. Like to make bones and teeth, you need adequate protein. In fact, there's a lot of myths there's all these myths that if you eat too much protein, your blood will become acidic and you'll get osteoporosis. Well, that's not true, because all food is acidic. But the only studies that have linked to protein is that when people eat more protein, they have less osteoporosis. And the reason being, the science of that is really simple. Basically, what's happening is that your bones are made out of around 30% protein. Maybe close to 40% protein, 30%, 35 I think it is, 35% protein. And basically the rest is minerals. And the protein is the matrix. It's like the skeleton of your bone. The bone is skeleton, but it's actually holding the minerals in place. So they found the protein is more important. In fact, that's one of the reasons why calcium is not the biggest issue with osteoporosis. Actually, they found that magnesium is more important because some cultures ate fairly low calcium in their diet, but they had adequate protein. They had vitamin D, usually from the sun, and they had magnesium in their intake, and so their bones were really strong. But protein has been only associated with the higher the protein level, the stronger the bones in osteoporosis. That's the studies. There's no studies that link osteoporosis and high protein intake. The only studies that actually do link that are protein powders. They're not food. But real food, always related to stronger bones. So again, that acid, alkaline, myth is falling by the wayside too. Another part, and this is related to cleansing diets, is raw foods diets. So people say you need raw foods because you need all those enzymes. The funny thing about enzymes, well, odd more than funny, it's not ha-ha funny, about enzymes is basically there's very little enzymes in raw food. So there's very little protein, so no protein digesting enzymes. There's, depending on if it's a fruit, there might be carbohydrate digesting enzymes, but only in the real sweet fruit, not in an apple that much. There's no fat digesting enzymes except in avocado, because there's not much fat in vegetables and fruits. So you don't get enzymes from them. But the main thing is that you can't digest large amounts of raw food. So it becomes a very low-calorie diet. Some people are trying to up it to make it better. Low-calorie diet, but the fiber is not digestible because human beings don't have a rumen. A rumen is a stomach with bacteria. The cows have 4 of them. They can eat grass. So the spirit of the cows we can see out there. No, they're not here right now, but we can see it because of the history here. But so basically, when we eat raw food, we don't digest it. We don't break it down. It becomes a little roughage. It's a cooling effect in the summer. But if it becomes a major part of your diet, then you become deficient nutritionally. And so raw foods diets. And basically all the other cleansing things basically are the same, like take this special herb for cleansing and this. Now, they do stimulate the organs, but what I found out about herbs that's very interesting is that herbs are ultimately energetic. So what they do, but you have to have enough energy in the body for them to function. So if you don't have enough nutrients in the body, enough maxi-nutrients, fats, proteins, carbohydrates, you don't have enough calories, then what happens is the herbs don't work as well. And I've seen that over and over again. They just move energy around, but you have to have the energy. Acupuncture is the same. It moves the energy around, you have to have the energy to move around. So basically, there is a different myths of this, that of the cleansing and fasting, and also myths about animal food, the harms of animal food. If there were harmful animal foods, they were so harmful, look at all those longevity cultures around the world. Eating it every day, that would be, that something's, wrong with this. Now, here, okay, so here we have, all right. Yeah. Got a nice picture of someone there. Yes.
It has something to do with cleansing.
Yeah.
There's a
I'll get back from this crazy person.
thing that where you take water and you put some vinegar in it, natural vinegar,
Uh-huh.
and how you balance it out and drink it. Does that help with digestion and cleansing?
Well, the fact is that recently found out it doesn't help with digestion. I thought it did. But the acidity of vinegar is so low compared to your stomach acid, it doesn't really do anything to your stomach acid. I thought it did, and it does seem to settle the stomach, but it doesn't really help your stomach acid because it's so low and it's so high. It's not low. It's not acidic enough to do anything. But that is the vinegar and honey cure, created by Dr. Jarvis. He wrote the original book on that from Vermont. But it doesn't work because of the acidity of that. It works because of the potassium levels. It turns out that in Vermont, the soil is so mineral rich, it's very low in potassium. So people would get sick in Vermont from low potassium states. And so he would give this remedy a few times a day, and people would raise their potassium levels. In fact, even the cows in Vermont, when given apple cider vinegar in the water, they would have more milk. So it's actually more a potassium deficiency. So that's what it relates to. If you need to raise the potassium levels, apple cider vinegar is very high in potassium. So it's a good potassium source. So here, let's go back to that crazy person here. So restrictive eating, again, restrictive eating is like, the interesting thing about restrictive eating is that it seems to be, in the East, this is related to a certain mentality. So in the East, it's related to a certain mentality. And so the mentality that it's related to is that you need to do something to cleanse your body and your spirit and mind because you're dirty, you're not good. And they have that kind of mentality in the East. It's really interesting. Every culture, as we said, has good and bad points, but that's like prominent in like many religions there, that you're not good enough, you have to cleanse, you get rid of the ego, impossible to do, but you try. It's like, but it doesn't mean that you can't break up things and detach yourself from certain things, but they have this cleansing thing that goes on there, and that some of the teachings came from that. In the West, they have the same thing, like cleansing and fasting to get rid of dirty thoughts and sin, created by religions to manipulate people, or something like that, because it does manipulate people greatly. And so so people would cleanse and do things and restrict their eating, and this has continued where we have all these myths that have come out, like the cholesterol myth. You're not supposed to eat cholesterol-rich foods because they cause heart disease. This has been disproven. In fact, there's very little link between cholesterol levels and heart disease. And the drugs they give to help people with that, basic like statin drugs, it's not working by lowering the cholesterol. It's working by making less inflammation in the arteries. But it has a lot of bad side effects. There are better ways to make less inflammation in the arteries. And in fact, lower cholesterol is a risk factor. Below 125 levels, risk factor for weakened immunity and also suicide and aggressive behavior. So low cholesterol is not good, but people will go, so they'll cut out all the cholesterol-rich foods, meat, chicken, or they'll cut them down. And this has been going on for 50 years, restrictive eating. And then fat was demonized. First, all fat was demonized, and then erroneously they put in the polyunsaturated fat as the hero. Corn industry loved it, soy industry loved it. So people were eating a lot of corn oil and soy oil because when you initially take a lot of those, it lowers the cholesterol. But it doesn't do anything for your heart, just lowers your cholesterol. And then when they found out that corn oil created cancer in animals, they found that out. When they give enough corn oil to animals, it creates cancer. Then the corn industry had to create a new product. So what do they say? Out of the frying pan into the fire. They created high fructose corn syrup. Right? Maybe worse, or maybe a little much worse than corn oil. But corn oil is not that great. It's pretty worse. So that means worser. It's kind of like Dumb and Dumber 2. No, it's like the new movie coming out. No, worser. It's a worser condition. So it's worse for you. So basically, then people will restrict their diets, and then of course calorie restriction, because people think they're going to gain weight with the evil calories. So they go through the periods like we talked about in the last class. Fasting, dieting, binging. Fasting, dieting, binging. Fasting, dieting, binging. Or what I like to say is training your body to gain weight. You train your body to do that each time. That's built into our biology because people in the past went through periods of famine, and so they would run out of food, and then the body, would store that. So restrictive eating is, yes, it's crazy, like this person here in the chart, and it is a straitjacket. It is a straitjacket. So my feeling now, and maybe that's because I restricted my eating, and you ask a person who's restricted eating if they feel restricted, said, no, I eat everything I want, as long as it's this, and this. It's like this. People will say, well, I'm totally satisfied eating this, and this. But I think with life, it's that old expression: are you living longer, or does it seem much longer? It's like, if you look at traditional societies around the world, people think like, modern macrobiotic cooking, the way it's taught in the schools, is something really special. But traditional cuisine is better than what's taught in the macrobiotic schools. The traditional cuisine, if you look at those like Anthony Bourdain, or is that his name, who went around the world, and you see him, at the seaside, at the Italian restaurant, eating all these foods, and it's real food, and really delicious and amazing taste. and then goes to someplace else. You get to a French restaurant, you see this amazing food, amazing taste. Nothing doesn't taste delicious. That's another mistake, and this was done in macrobiotic schools and teachings, is that food should be medicinal. And the medicinal foods should have no taste, or just certain tastes were okay, like salt was okay, but not much. No herbs, no spices. Then people would add herbs and spices and salt, but no fat. It's like, really, it's a kind of crazy idea. My feeling now, after counseling so many thousands of people and teaching so many people, that healthy food is delicious food. Healthy food is delicious food, and the healthy person should try to eat as unrestricted natural foods as possible. Primarily natural foods, primarily unprocessed foods, as possible in a wider variety, so that they can feel well and they could feel free too. And I have an interesting story about this. Many years ago, I was helping a woman with her cancer, and she had seen a prominent teacher, one of my teachers, and then I helped her, and she had recovered from a cancer and did some medical treatment, but she was free of the cancer, because cancers don't always get recovered by medical treatment, so it can come back or spread. So she was 3 years free of this, and she was happy about that, getting tested every year to make sure. But her diet was all the same. She was given, which I used to do, a certain regimen where eat this 2 or 3 times a week, eat this 2 or 3 times a week, eat this 2 or 3 times a week. And so she was doing that, the same thing, for 3 years. Same exact 3 times a week, 3 times a week. And so back then I thought, well, you need to really make your diet more varied. And this was more than 10 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago. And so I didn't understand certain things about food, so I was just working within the parameters that I knew. It wasn't that wide to widen her diet. And then a few years back, after not seeing her for maybe 14 years, 15 years, she came back to see me again. And so I said, well, your health is not bad, but you don't have energy. And she's older now, in her 70s, and at that time she was in her late 60s. So I said, you just don't have energy. You don't have vitality. I don't feel that. I was checking this place. You check oriental pulses, and you check other things, and just appearance. She didn't have a quality of vitality around her. And I said, so I started to teach her about certain things, about things that we've talked about. What is really the macrobiotic diet, and that what my experience is that people need natural animal foods after years of deficiency, particularly even before deficiency. So she started to change her diet slowly, adding more fish in, some eggs. Then she had natural meats, natural chicken, some dairy food. She tends to agree more with like goat and sheep cheese. Some people like that, so she was eating that more. And she noticed a couple of things. One is that she was able to simplify her diet more. So she would have like a grain or a starch, like a sweet potato, and fish or meat and a vegetable. And the modern macrobiotics would emphasize 17 dishes at the meal to get variety. It's like, and but she found then she started to notice that slowly her vitality was changing. She had to go through a change where she was getting indigestion, couldn't digest the food, but that went away. And then last year, and she continues to see me. For what I do is extended shiatsus for some people. It's acupressure massage with extra advice. So continue to see me. And then last year she said something interesting. She said, wow, it's really interesting. I feel like I've been let out of prison. Wow. She said, I went to a French restaurant and they had they had natural lamb. I even finished it with like a creme brulee dessert, and I had some mashed potatoes and I had some vegetables, and I felt like in heaven. And she, and it's interesting now. She's in her early 70s, and she has more vitality than she's had in 30 years. She said, her energy is really incredible, vital. She, she would cut in the summer. She would cut her lawn with a mechanical mower. It's a small lawn, but she said she had all the vitality and energy. She didn't get tired for that. And then she said, few months ago, she said, I'm going to renew my passport because I have the energy to travel, and I now know that I don't have to be so restrictive with my eating, especially in Europe. A lot of foods are natural there, so she's going to travel because she feels like she doesn't have to restrict. And so, she feels amazingly good. And also she felt there was a mental release too, to not to be restricted. And I call that health, physical and mental health. Now, they're closely related to restrictive diets is the idea that you'll become more spiritual if you don't eat meat or you don't eat dairy. Well, frankly, that is prejudice against all the wonderful spiritual people, including our ancestors, who ate meat and ate dairy, and probably more spiritual than those teachers. In fact, I know they're more spiritual because I know those teachers, are, I found out that some of my teachers, were really bogus. They were not spiritual people, but they were pretending to be spiritual, but their behavior was anything but spiritual. They were not spiritual at all. They were just mean and petty. And they're supposed to be eating the perfect diet that makes you spiritual. Well, the proof is in the pudding, as we said. So basically, say that to American Indians. You go to, if you found 100 years ago, the traditional American Indians, they don't hold a candle to any vegetarian, vegan, or modern macrobiotic teacher, who is professing they're spiritual. Or you go to the Aboriginals of Australia, or you go to any of those traditional people, and the way Weston Price wrote about them, they're incredibly connected. Now, everybody's connected with their own tradition. So, in Switzerland, it was Christianity and God. You go to another culture, it's another. We're all connected to spirit, but we interpret it differently, right? Different names. Different names for the same thing. But yes, of course, people say mine's the best way. Everybody should do mine, right? But if you've been around long enough, you usually find out that, that yes, maybe some people can do yours and some people can't. It's like, because we all have, it's good to have, some connection to spirit, but we have a lot of different ways to do that. And we have a lot of names for it too, different names that we call it. So that, in fact, it's funny because years ago when I was recommending starting, when I was very conservative and still connected to a school where it was very politically incorrect to recommend any other animal food besides fish, that would be sacrilegious to do that at the school I was involved with. You would be what do they call that? Excommunicated, right? If you did that. So then I was recommending more fish to people, and then one of the other teachers who was my elder, funny thing, elder by 5 years. He started 5 years before me. He sat down and talked to me and said, well, we don't not eat fish for that. We eat it for spiritual reasons. I said, and what I said back to him was that, well, if you're not healthy and strong, you can't be spiritual. So this is now, I've always liked the Taoist tradition, although we can't take any tradition. That's the Chinese tradition forbidden, because that was then, this is now. So you can't take it. Some people try to take the Taoist tradition or the Indian tradition and do everything they said because these holy sages told us this must be true. But the fact is that, yes, they have some good insights and deep insights that we can get something from, but we have to put it for now, because some things don't, because there's a different world that we have than those ancient people had. So basically, but the Taoists had an interesting thing. They were an interesting group. They said if you're not strong enough, then physically strong, it's hard to be spiritually strong. They're connected to each other. So and emotionally, everything is connected. So restrictive, eating, that is really a bogus type of conceptual idea, because the people around the world, spirituality has more to do with being connected to nature, the environment, the greater world that's around us. It's not, and food can help, and I do think food can help, but food that is balanced for your body helps more than conceptually like staying away from vegetarian meat. Now, the interesting thing is that I know one writer on Chinese medicine was talking about how in Tibet, people, a practitioner, like a monk practitioner, would get to the point that they wouldn't have to eat much food. But he explained that he ran into many vegetarians who were trying to be vegetarian to get to the point where you were spiritual. But that's not the way they did it traditionally. The way they did it traditionally, where you didn't have to eat food, is that you do years and years of practices, 8 to 10 hours a day. And in Tibet, this Chinese medicine writer said, then you make a rainbow body. Once you have the rainbow body, you don't need much food. But most of us would not want to do that, because you would go through all these you'd have to like detach from life and do all these practices. And theoretically, it might be possible, but most of us are not going to do that, right? Or it's too late, we had to start when we were 20 or 30. And you may not want to do it also. It may not be necessary to do it either. But the point he was making, that people have it backwards. They think that they're going to be spiritual from being vegetarian, when that's not the way it was done traditionally. The one who was traditionally is you do practices and change yourself. Now, I also I've studied with some Indian teachers who the disciples and the Indian teacher looked terribly emaciated. So it's not a guarantee, someone, if you're doing yoga like an hour a day, that's not going to do it, And even if you did it many hours a day, it may not do it too. But I don't think in order to enjoy the world of spirit, we actually have to get to that place. That's kind of an unusual tradition, maybe for people who are professional spiritualists. Right? Most of us, are only doing it as a hobby. No, I'm kidding. That's not as a hobby, but we're doing it. It's not the main thing. It's not our occupation. So you might say. And then even then, I'm skeptical whether that really is true, because I haven't seen anybody, and probably you wouldn't, because they wouldn't be here. This world would be too disturbing, maybe, for people who have done things like that. So, but I've never really seen or heard of an authentic person who did that. There's some in America. There's some people who profess to be breatharians. They found them in the pizza shop, right? Eating pizza on the side, pizza and Coke. So they were not really breatharians. But again, we like this idea of how we could eat. It's really more of like an idea that there's something else that we can do in this life, beyond this life. So we like the idea. I was very attracted to that idea myself, a personal idea. Okay, nutritional deficiencies. So here's a vitamin D and dementia. Just a little thing I got there. So basically, nutritional deficiencies. For instance, many diets. The interesting thing about nutritional deficiencies is that vegetarian and vegan diets are particularly prone to things like B12 deficiency, and because there's two reasons for that. One of the reasons for that is that a lot of vegetarians will do things like they'll basically, if they take B12, they'll make a mistake and they'll take the B12 in a tablet form, and they might take it once a week or twice a week, thinking that that's okay, that's enough for them. Take the B12 once or twice a week. But the problem is that without B12, without B12, you don't create stomach acid. And if you don't create, and your digestion doesn't work because of nerves there. And so basically what happens, and if you basically don't have enough stomach acid because your diet is low in protein, what happens is you don't absorb B12. You need stomach acid to absorb B12. That's why the acid-blocking drugs are really terrible for health. And most people who have acid reflux have low stomach acid. They don't have high stomach acid. So B12 deficiency, is often in certain macrobiotic circles, it's poo-pooed as being not that important. But there's a really good book called "Could It Be B12?" written by an emergency room doctor and nurse, husband and wife team. And basically they have, because the macrobiotic eating is always the narrow macrobiotic eating that's taught in the books, constantly through the book, they're warning that you're at risk for macrobiotic eating and vegetarian eating and vegan eating. That's the risk factor all throughout the book of B12 deficiency. Because the anti-supplement, now if you take that pill and you don't have enough B12 to foster absorption of B12, the pill is worthless. So the only way you could really get it in your system is by taking a sublingual pill where you melt under your tongue in a high dose, like 5,000 micrograms. And I think for someone who's vegan, after they recover enough B12, they should put 1,000 every day to keep it up. Because you don't absorb a lot of it. You only absorb a certain amount. Now there's some people who need shots. But here are some of the things that basically, just to know how serious that B12 deficiency is and how really it makes nutritional poverty. And only foods that have B12 are animal foods in high amounts. And although we store them, as soon as you stop eating animal foods, or you're eating animal foods that have low B12, like white meat fish, very low in B12, then you start losing B12 from your body. And so the richest source is liver. Second richest source is sardines. And then all other animal foods like meat is a good amount. Meats have a good amount of B12. Fatty fish has more B12. So eggs don't have much B12. It has a lot of other nutrients, but not much B12 in it. So here are some of the symptoms of B12 deficiency on nutritionally poor diets people will get. Inflamed tongue, premature gray hair, disturbed carbohydrate metabolism. In other words, they don't utilize the carbohydrates well. Fatigue, weakness, weight loss, constipation, infertility, vision problems. These are all B12 deficiency signs. Loss of hearing and tinnitus, ringing in the ears. Numbness and tingling in the hands and feet. That's a big one. Alcoholism. So alcoholism, people are attracted to alcohol because the brain is not getting the B12, so it's not functioning well. Impotence, will be created. And it's interesting because when I was living 40 years ago in a macrobiotic community in Boston where we were studying there, and again, primarily focusing on vegetarian macrobiotic eating, there was a joke that if the women wanted to have a good sexual relationship, they'd have to go outside of the macrobiotic community to get a meat-eating man. And it was true. It was actually true for the most part, because basically after a while, for a lot of reasons, the sexual energy would go down. One of them is the B12 deficiency. And some people don't have a high storage, so it would affect very quickly. Incontinence, B12 deficiency. Hyperpigmentation or hypopigmentation. So if you get white spots or no spots, or lacking skin pigmentation, dark and light patches of the skin basically. Neuralgia, neuritis, inflammation, nerve inflammation, bursitis, inflammation of the bursa, anemia, including pernicious anemia, spinal cord degeneration. There was one wonderful person, really wonderful person, nice person who used to teach at the school that I worked at, and his spine started degenerating. So, and he was really tall. He was tall, above here. It's taller than me. So it started degenerating every year. It went lower, 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 lower. And then basically he disappeared. We don't know exactly where, though. We think he's in California, because I've seen his name there. But he was Igor. But I think that basically he's in a nursing home, because he's right nearby where a nursing home is. That's where his address is located. So probably his spine degenerated totally. And, and he was the utmost, he was really wonderful person, but the utmost purist. It's funny because he used to give a lecture that he rallied against the eating of chicken. These are funny ideas like, you eat chicken? Well, you become chicken. Oh, you become chicken if you eat chicken. Talk about a dumb idea. It's really a dumb idea. Like you eat chicken, you become chicken. A friend of mine, Steve Gagne, who wrote the book, The Energetics of Food, he said, if you've seen a chicken in the wild, you develop the strength and the sharpness of the chicken, yes. Right? So you don't develop these. This is something else. Don't develop chicken. you develop the strength of a chicken and the sharpness and if you see a chicken go for something, it's single-minded. That's the energy that you develop, the positive energy. So the same way with beef, there's positive elements of the cattle that you develop. You don't become dumb like the cattle, or which is insulting to cattle. The cattle are just cattle, right? So they are who they are, right? So, but you develop a certain strength, and this is actually known. The beef eaters, beef with incredible amount of strength, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But so basically, his spine degenerated, and I'm sure it's from a B12 deficiency. He was not really open-minded about anything like that. Psoriasis and skin problems, brain degeneration, insomnia, irrational and chronic anger. Actually, had a lot of experience about this in the macrobiotic community, because people, and especially when I worked at the school, the most irrational and chronic anger people had there of any place I'd been. It was just amazing to see. And I didn't notice that until I got out of the environment. The kind of person I could handle things, that are strange. But after I stopped working there, I realized I was de-stressing from this place because I wasn't around crazy people. And what I realized is that, for years I was telling my wife, as I started to realize that there's a connection to brain chemicals and nutritional deficiencies, that everybody was nutritionally deprived, B12 and other nutrients, and that's why the behavior was so strange. And she would say, "Oh no, they're just nasty," right? And I said, "No, I don't think so. I think something else is going on because it's too common." And I noticed that there's an uptightness there, a tension among everybody there, that I didn't notice about that until I left it. And people go for a week and it feels like there's so many things going on in a week. So you feel great because it's a new environment, new things you're learning. So there's so many wonderful things that you feel. But if you're there a longer time, then you really see, there's a energy, a quality among people that you start to notice. And some of it's the B12 deficiency, and the some other nutritional deficiencies. So irrational and chronic anger, violent behavior, lack of balance, abnormal gait, like walking, combat fatigue, any emotional disorder up to and including insanity. So those are B12 deficiency signs. And over the years, I realized, and it's just remarkable to me that certain people in the macrobiotic movement would keep basically saying the same things because they had to see the same things I saw over the years. I mean, people going nuts, people going senile, people who were on these real narrow diets for a while, people getting cancer, heart disease, they had to see this. But again, they've become the health gurus. And I think the answer is they're too attached to be able to change it and alter it. So in their diets. So the other vitamin A deficiency is very, very common deficiency. And the reason being, this is more in vegetarian and vegan diets, vitamin A deficiency. And the common deficiency of vitamin A is interesting because there's no vitamin A in carrots. There's no vitamin A in squash. You don't realize this. So if all the stars are aligned, you could make vitamin A out of squash and carrots and greens. It's from yellow and orange vegetables, but if you may have noticed if the green gets older, it turns yellow. That's the carotene that's in it. So you can get it from that, but the stars have to be aligned.
Where do you get it from then?
You could make it out of these foods, but you have to eat it with fat, adequate fat. You have to have a really good functioning liver and a good functioning thyroid. So if all those stars are aligned, you get it. But you can't rely on it. Traditional people never relied on it as the major source of vitamin A. What they did was ate vitamin A-rich foods. Vitamin A-rich foods would be things like liver, sardines, butter from grass-fed animals, eggs from animals that ate healthy feed or pasture. These are some of the sources that you can get it. Some dairy products you can get it too. So, in a preform, these are called preformed vitamin A. And when you get the preformed vitamin A, basically your body uses it completely. Cod oil, I recommend if people wanted to get vitamin A from a cod oil, you get the fermented cod oil. There's some new cod oils on the market. Sounds like, some new kids on the block. No, there's some new cod oils on the block, but they're interesting. You can look into them. Radiant Life is one company that sells these. Green Pastures is another. But high amounts of vitamin A. And my wife had an interesting thing. She was explaining about how some prominent teacher would have problems with night vision, which is dependent on vitamin A, and years ago. And my wife started to have problems with that, and some problems with the eyes, and I had just been learning about cod oil, so I said, why don't you take cod oil? So she took cod oil, and it went away. Night vision disappeared, vision at night was very good. Eye inflammation went away right away, within days. So she was deficient in vitamin A. And the interesting thing is that, I'll take cod oil regularly, but I also like to eat sardines regularly. So I get a good amount of vitamin A from that. And, and I like liver more than my wife, so I can eat some occasional liver, and she doesn't like it as much. She'll like it as a pate more than anything else. The old.
What were the name of the two companies?
Radiant Life, and Green Pastures. Now, if you put in Green Pasture, you might get a Christian site. If you like that, you can go to that, but you won't get cod oil there. just to warn you, no cod oil at that site. So vitamin A is another one. Protein, complete protein, is a really common deficiency. And the next class, part 2 of this, I'll tell you how to diagnose that deficiency, protein deficiency, because you need complete proteins in the body. And vitamin D deficiency is also common because very few foods have vitamin D, and people don't get out in the sun as much anymore. And here's an interesting thing. Even if you get out in the sun, if your cholesterol is low, you don't produce vitamin D, because you need enough cholesterol in your body to produce vitamin D. And cholesterol in your food, some people absolutely need cholesterol in the food to keep their cholesterol up, especially as they get older, because cholesterol is produced by your liver. And sometimes as the body gets older, it's not producing enough, and it needs the extra from food. And when it gets the extra from food, your body doesn't produce it. There are some thoughts that if you only use carbohydrate to produce cholesterol from your liver, that it causes some problems. It's a different kind of cholesterol. If you eat it, your body produces less of it, and it seems to be better for your body. For instance, like if you ate a lot of white sugar, you'd produce lots of cholesterol, but it seems to be a different quality than the one that you're eating. So eating cholesterol is really important for the body. So cholesterol is really important for the brain. So I don't know if you noticed that I've noticed just by observing that long-term vegan, whether eating macrobiotic vegan or other, start to have some kind of unusual mental disorders. And some vegetarian populations have a lot of anger, a lot of violence, depression, anxiety around the world, the ones that are more vegetarian. Because again, I think part of it is nutrient depletion, cholesterol depletion. Cholesterol is needed for your brain. And also part of that is fat. But the most important fat for your body is actually saturated fat that you eat in foods. And basically your brain is 60% fat. Some people are 90. We call them fatheads. No, it's not. No, but 60% fat. So you need so these are the things that basically now the interesting thing about the vegan, we'll talk about other approaches that leave things out, but the interesting thing about the vegan eating is, if you go, there's a great book written by an anthropologist called Good to Eat, Marvin Harris, Good to Eat. And he wrote a couple of books about food that are very fascinating books on food. And so in this, he has a section called Meat Hunger. And basically, he talks about how all traditional cultures valued access to animal food, and they all felt it bestowed health and well-being beyond mere survival. So cultures went out of their way to get meats and animal foods. And compared to vegetables, it's much harder to catch the animals, the wild animals in the past. And it's much harder to catch them, but all the traditional cultures went out of their way, all the effort, and there's a lot of effort to do that, to catch the animals. even though vegetables were there and much less effort, because they knew that there was something beyond survival that the meat gave. And so he called it meat hunger. And the interesting thing is that when, like for instance, the Aztecs started to practice cannibalism in South America. And the interesting thing about that is that they didn't really have enough animal food raised. The royalty ate more animal food, but the common people didn't eat as much animal food. And then when they started running out of animal food, they started adopting the practice of cannibalism. So, you know, that was, maybe they were thinning down the population too. No. So basically, no major religion ever was following total veganism. So even in the Hindu religion, as I said, only the Brahmins were purely vegetarian, but dairy food was valued. And some of the Brahmins will eat eggs too, because I'm working with one now, and he'll have eggs. I said, great. So I gave him eggs. None of the major religions banned the consumption of animal flesh and eggs completely. In India, as much as they could afford to, they would eat any kind of animal they could, except for the Brahmins. And some of the Brahmins probably did it too, because it's breaking the rules is what people do. In Buddhism, I told you about you can't kill animals that you kill, but if someone else kills it, fine. Now, the interesting thing, I think it's fascinating that I thought for many years that in Buddhism no animals were eaten, because in the American version they keep saying this, but it's not true at all in Asia. They eat all kinds of animals and they eat it regularly. The idea of sacrifice is fundamental to Christianity and Jewish religion. In prehistoric times, meat was shared as a communal thing and brought the community together. And it is a credibly better source of protein. I mean, there's no doubt about it, it's a better source of protein for tissues, muscles, cells, hormones. If you don't have enough protein, you don't create hormones. So that's probably one of the reasons why they had that joke in the old macrobiotic community that for women, if they wanted to have good sex, go outside of the macrobiotic community, find a meat eater, because they were making hormones. They were making good hormones to do that. So basically, there's very little. Basically, there's only a small amount in the beans and grains. There's about the same amount of protein. People don't realize in the dry grains about 10% protein. So it's both grains and beans. Beans is not a high protein source. That's why you have to eat like a huge amount of them, like a day, to get close to it, and you may not, because it may be hard to digest. So basically, grains have anywhere from 2 to 5 to 10% protein in the grains, and that's about the same as the beans. And for the most part, we need 10 essential amino acids. That's the proteins. We'll talk about how to see that, and that's in animal foods. So basically, these are things that people would do. Now, in the low carb eating is interesting, because there are a lot of different theories about why you should eat low carb. And for sure, some people do better for a certain time, going off carbs. But here's the kicker: in order to do well going off carbs, you have to up the fat. So temporarily you have to up the fat, otherwise you won't get enough calories. So, for instance, the low-carb eating, they make, of course, the most famous of the low-carb today is the popularity of the paleo eating. So paleo eating is they eat everything except grains and dairy products. And the theory behind paleo is, you may have heard, is that we are genetically evolved in a 2.5 million period, give or take a few days. The DNA, or genetic blueprint, was created at this time, so we should eat that time, at what we ate from that time. And then at the end of the Paleolithic era, we started to eat, we started major agriculture, some say 15,000 years ago or so, and we started to have grains and dairy products. And even a good book like the Vegetarian Myth, which has a lot of good points, says this and basically and explains how people's health became poor when they started to eat grains and dairy. Well, other people have explained why that is. It was poor because agriculture was new. In other words, it was done badly. And people were adjusting their bodies and getting used to new foodstuffs. So yes, when people switched, for a period of time, their health was poor. After that, of course, bodies adapted, and then the cultures around the world that we looked at had incredible health, eating various kinds of grains and carbohydrates. And so they eat, of course, lots of leafy greens in paleo diets. They eat nuts and seeds. And of course, the interesting thing is the paleo diets is, the paleo diets basically are made up completely. Because a paleo meal, might have like sweet potatoes, coming from the southern area. And then it has wild salmon, which comes from the north. And then it has coconut oil, comes from Thailand. And then it has kale, maybe it came from the local area in Massachusetts. And then finishing off with a chocolate dessert with cashew butter, or cashew melted in it. Delicious dessert. I'm not saying it's not good. All that food is good. We've gone to a place in New York City called HU, which is primarily paleo, but they have all natural meats and other things. And so they're nice meals, nice meal to have. It's good quality food. But of course, no people ate like that around the world. It was just, and paleo keeps changing and evolving because now they find there are certain things that happen with it. But some of the myths, the problems with paleo is that slowly, this problem with paleo is that what happens slowly with vegan and vegetarian diets. Slowly people have all the same issues. And I think what connects those issues is the metabolism starts to drop and become lower. And because you're missing some nutrients, puts your body under stress. So some of the paleo myths, so what happens, these are the same things that happen for people on vegetarian, vegan, and narrow macrobiotic diets. Skin issues start to arise, loss of sex drive, we talked about early community, low energy, mood problems, colds, people start to get more frequent colds, sleep and heart palpitations, and many other signs. But what happens is that in all these diets, there is a honeymoon period. Now, some of these diets, all the natural diets that are restrictive, whether it be paleo or vegan, the two camps, right? Low carb, natural animal food, no animal food at all. What they do have in common is they all have vegetables, usually organic. And a lot of Americans don't eat vegetables, which is not a good thing. They're mostly organic, high-quality organic foods, so basically no pesticides, chemicals. You take that away, you feel better. They're generally low sugar or at least no refined sugars. Take that away, people feel better. There's no chemicals. Take that away, people feel better. And nutritionally rich in low in chemicals, low in additives, and then stressful. The stress puts you into a hyper state of stress, and that lasts as long as your adrenals are strong. So like if you start when you're 20 and your ears go down to your knees, you can go a long time on that diet and feel good. Actually, what happens when you're in stress mode, your body breaks down and rebuilds very quickly. So your skin looks good, the hair looks good, you feel a lot of energy. And then depending on how old you are, how strong your adrenals are, then up to usually around 6 months, the honeymoon period is over. The honeymoon is over. And person starts to feel all these symptoms slowly, tired. One man who wrote about this joked that basically he went hiking when he was in his paleo period and no carbs, lots of fats. And he went hiking in the mountains, and so he's hiking, and there were other people hiking. And he didn't realize how slow he was moving until he was hiking with other people. So he kept getting passed by this overweight professor who was older than him. On the trail, he kept going, and the older professor was snacking on, on trail mix, with nuts and sugary chocolate and other things, in his diet. And he was overweight, but he was much more energetic than him. And he was steady and he'd keep going, but he couldn't move fast because that's the nature of fat. It's slow burning, not fast burning. So, we'll talk more about, the different things, the myths of paleo, but what happens is without the carbohydrates, you have problems. Now, Of course, a lot of restrictive diets is that I'm not good enough mind. This person there. And then, interesting enough, sacred foods, there are two consistently sacred foods in traditional cultures. So you might be able to guess what they are right now. So, any guesses?
I'd say beans and rice. That's
Well, everybody didn't eat rice, so. Sacred foods.
Oh, sacred.
Grains. Grains in general were considered sacred, and animal foods. Two sacred foods, animal foods and grains. So they realized they needed carbohydrates. They didn't know what a carbohydrate was from Adam. And they knew that they need something about the animal foods was building and rich. So these are the two consistently sacred foods around the world. Animal foods and grains. Those are the two ones.
You don't mean sacred religious. You mean sacred.
Well, traditional people did not separate they didn't have they didn't separate spirit from daily life. So these were foods that were revered. They actually often thanked gods and goddesses for these foods because they felt they were gifts from the gods. They were sacred because they kept them alive. So the spirit of Thanksgiving with these pilgrims, over on the coast there, who were doing the first Thanksgiving, they were thanking God for their survival, for food. That they had enough food to survive because a lot of people died who came over, after they got here. 150, half of the people died who came over. And so those were considered, this is the concept of sacred foods. So sacred food is not, we separate religion, into holidays and things like this. But traditional people didn't have to have a separation. Spirit was daily life. So this was the idea of sacred foods. Now, here's something that I created. This is basically, and what this is called, what I've created here is called the 4 traditional food groups. So, energizing foods, building foods, mixed foods, and balancing foods. So these are the 4 traditional food groups. So energizing, we'll talk more about this, in the next class. But energizing foods, we talked a little bit the other day. So energizing foods are basically carbohydrates in the form of grains, in the form of tubers like potatoes and sweet potatoes, in the form of fruits and natural sugars, natural sweeteners and sugars. So we need these foods for energy, and some of them are quick energizing, some are slow energizing. Then we need building foods. Building foods are primarily protein-rich foods and animal foods. The beans is more of an energizing food than a protein-rich foods, although, theoretically, you can eat enough of them and use amount of them to get protein, but this is more like meats like chicken, natural meats, natural chicken, beef, fish, dairy products, but particularly in this category would be things like cheeses, although you can get protein in certain other foods, but we'll talk about that. And eggs would be in here, venison, all the animal foods. Then mixed foods are foods that have both energizing effects and both basically building effects. And that would be the fats. So fats have this. Now, certain mixed foods are combinations also, like things like raw milk. Raw milk or yogurt, because it's very high in carbohydrate, but there's also good fat and protein in there. You always want complete, never low fat. So mixed foods have both qualities. They have energizing and building foods. Fats have energizing and building foods. Remember, you need enough fats for your brain to function. And then we have balancing foods. So balancing foods don't fit in any of the other categories. We'll go over this more in the next class. But mixed foods would be things like seaweeds, right? Not much protein or fat. There's a little carbohydrate in there. Seasonings, seasonings, like salt and other seasonings. They help you. These mixed foods help you digest or balance the other foods. help you get energy, help you build. Non-starchy types of vegetables like lettuce and greens. So some people, you can't get all your protein from kale. There's very little kale. There's little protein in kale. One famous vegan doctor who written several books said, there's more protein in kale by weight than in a steak. Oh yeah. So basically, this much kale compares to this much steak, right? So you can't eat that much kale, to get the protein. So it's, again, a lot of years ago, there was a dietitian who was vegetarian macrobiotic, and she wrote a book where everything had, all the nutrients were in things. And you get this here, and get this here, get this here. But it's all theoretical because, it's how much you absorb. You eat 4 cups of beans in a day. I don't know if you're going to absorb much of that protein when you get all that distress in your digestion. So it's not going to happen. So balancing foods, including beverages. Most beverages, most teas, herbal teas, are digestive. That's interesting. They're digestive. That's what the effect are. They're digestive. They help you digest foods. So these are some examples of the balancing foods. So any questions? Going to take a short break soon.
So the seasoning, non-starchy veggies, those are balancing?
Balancing foods, yeah.
So another question about osteoporosis. Are you better off taking a supplement or better off with foods?
Better off with foods. The foods that you don't necessarily, some traditional cultures ate a lot of calcium and some people didn't. So it varied. But the 2 sources of calcium in traditional cuisine are bone broths, fish or beef or chicken, which broths that are cooked a long time with the bones with something acidic, like wine or vinegar, to pull out the minerals out of the bones. So cultures that didn't eat dairy would get that. They wouldn't get their calcium from seaweed. People who ate seaweed, the only people in the world who ate bulks of seaweed are basically in Japan and Scotland. Those 2 people. But they did that for generations after generations so they could digest it. They could digest what they get from it. It's really hard to digest carbohydrates in seaweeds. It's really basically hard to digest. So you can't rely on that if you're not Japanese for a calcium source. So bone broths, for cultures that didn't eat dairy, including even Japan, that might have been a major source of calcium because they made a lot of fish bone broths. And then also dairy products, natural dairy products. Those are the 2 sources of calcium.
And I'm sure you've heard of these hot shots with cayenne pepper and, I forget what else is in that shot.
Apple cider
Something.
vinegar or
like
something, yeah.
Are they worth it or not?
Are they worth it?
Worth taking?
For thrills.
Okay, so they don't really know.
Well, they don't.
Supposed to be energy.
Well, the thing is that it's a stimulant, but it's not a good stimulant like a grain is a stimulant or starch is a stimulant. But that stimulant is basically, there's an herbalist who wrote some good books, Michael Thierry. He said that the hot flavor stimulates the body to action, but you have to have energy. So cayenne, you have to look at where cayenne came from, then you can know what it's good for. So cayenne chili peppers basically came from South America, and they ate it in very hot climates. And in very hot climates, they ate more spice because it actually kills virus and bacteria. And everything in the hot climate, a lot of virus and bacteria grows, and that protects you. So basically, if you have any kind of weakness, I wouldn't use it in this climate much. I like that little Japanese red pepper on my soba noodles sometimes, from time to time. But but if you, for instance, the hot flavor, like for instance, if you're eating some natural meat regularly, the hot flavor actually can be nice and balancing, and that's when it warms you up. But if you don't eat that red meat and you take it, it cools you down. So it releases the energy that you get from food, basically.
And tofu.
Tofu is something I tell people not to eat, and tempeh, consistently, because first of all, there's no protein available from it. It's not a good protein source. But it does have high amounts of phytoestrogens in it. So if men don't like their sex, you can maybe take a lot of tofu and tempeh. So you could change sexes, give yourself a sex change. It's not going to change the outside, though. Sorry, it just change your inside there. So it does, and I've noticed that it has a weakening effect. Plus, also, tofu particularly is high in goitrogens that knock down your thyroid. So in Asia, when they ate it, they never ate large amounts of it. So if a person has a low metabolism, I tell them to cut it out. If someone doesn't have a low metabolism or they recover their metabolism, maybe occasionally just in small amounts, like they would do in Asia, just tiny amounts in soup or things like that.
Last question, your grains, soak or don't soak? I didn't understand the difference.
Well, for the most part, I recommend people do a lot of soaking to neutralize. Soak it like in warm water in the cold weather for 24 hours and throw away the water. Now, as you get healthier, when people are not as healthy, they might do that a lot. But as they get healthier, you might do that most of the time, but not all the time.
What does that help with? Digestion?
It helps to break down a substance called phytic acid in there. Phytic acid blocks the mineral absorption from foods you eat it with. But I think, that people who talk about zinc deficiencies from unfermented grain, in the Middle East there's a lot of zinc deficiency, and they said it was from the pita bread that wasn't fermented. But I don't think it actually was from that. I think it was from a nutritionally deficient diet. And because everything works together. So for instance, if you don't have adequate fat and protein and minerals and vitamins, then that bread might affect you. You can't handle that. Because you do produce an enzyme in your colon that breaks down the phytic acid. It's called phytase. So that's why some cultures didn't really soak much. They were really healthy, but they were healthy. So they could produce this enzyme and break down the phytic acid. For people, if you feel any health issues, I recommend you soak as much as possible.
And juicing, do you think that's beneficial?
No. Well, if you're what benefit would it have? Well, again, it doesn't have a cleansing benefit. We came to that conclusion. It doesn't cleanse. It washes the body out. I think the benefit of juicing is some sweet fruit juices can de-stress you because the sugar in them will de-stress you. Same way that some carrot juice can de-stress too. So the other juices, I think they're limited in what they do for the body. But, some sweet juices like an apple juice or apple cider, or if you really need to be de-stressed, very stressed, a little bit of orange juice or something will de-stress you. And the fresh one always tastes better. So, what's that? Not hot, no. But not freezing either. Icy cold things are not great, but you don't have to warm up juices. But apple cider, of course, you can't help it. It's much more relaxing and delicious when it's warm this time of year. So.
And of course, sake, John,
Yes.
And they don't have any
Don't have any what?
sake.
Oh, no sake here. No.
none?
Do you have, macrobiotics is a sweet vegetable drink? Is
Uh-huh.
that still on your to-do good?
I think the sweet vegetable drink is worthless. The question is about the sweet vegetable drink. Always found it was worthless. And if anything, the sweet vegetables is much better for you. If you need some kind of sweetness, sweet vegetables. But if you want to really distress, then some natural sweeteners would do a job better for you. So
So much work for worthless.
well, yeah, all the chopping for I don't think it's worth the chopping to do it. If you're going to chop anything, chop some carrots and cook them up and.
Amasa?
Amasake can also be a de-stressing sweet, so that can work as a sweet to de-stress you. Hot apple cider or cool apple juice can de-stress.
All right.
Very nice.
Okay, so we'll take a break and we'll come back. We're going to come back in 15 minutes.